I tend really to only work on things that I have a kind of compulsion to do.
After The Boxer, Daniel Day-Lewis announced his retirement from acting. But then he returned and took on one of the most iconic villain roles of his career, Bill the Butcher in Gangs of New York. Bill is not just an ordinary villain. Under Day-Lewis's performance, he becomes a symbol of chaos, violence, and an obsession with power. What makes Bill terrifying isn't his actions, but his very being. Confident, calm, yet always carrying an unpredictable, menacing energy. In confrontation scenes, Bill doesn't need to constantly yell. Just a glance, a small gesture, or the way he handles the knife is enough to create a suffocating tension. It's the kind of villain who is both captivating and terrifying, keeping the audience glued to the screen, even knowing he's the bad guy. What's special about Day-Lewis is his almost absolute immersion in the role. He didn't act Bill, but lived Bill, from his voice and gait to his worldview. It was this obsession that made the character so real it was terrifying. Bill the Butcher isn't just some kind of villain to hate. He's a blend of order and chaos, reason and instinct. And it's this contradiction that creates an irresistible allure. Through this role, Daniel Day-Lewis proves one thing. A great villain needs more than just brutality. They need depth, charm, and a compelling worldview to both frighten and captivate the audience. In Gangs of New York, Daniel Day-Lewis further elevates the character of Bill the Butcher. Not just a simple villain, but a living embodiment of the conflict between civilization and violence. Bill is the kind of character that audiences both hate and are drawn to. He can be ruthlessly cold one moment, but then immediately display a false, almost theatrical politeness. This very contrast makes him unpredictable and terrifying. In some scenes, Bill doesn't need to act much. A simple remark, a glance, or the way he handles a situation is enough to create immense psychological pressure on those around him. He uses both violence and subtlety to control his world. It's noteworthy that Bill doesn't see himself as evil. In his eyes, every action has its own order, whether it's killing, betrayal, or manipulation. This absolute confidence in his distorted value system makes the character more dangerous than any simple villain. Daniel Day-Lewis portrays Bill not just through dialogue, but through his entire presence. His distinctive voice, posture, gaze, and even the way he controls the space around him. Every time Bill appears, the scene seems to be stretched taut by an invisible pressure. Through this role, he not only created a memorable villain, but also portrayed a man full of contradictions, both rule-abiding and brutal, both elegant and savage. And it is this combination that makes Bill the Butcher one of cinema's iconic villains. Interestingly, Bill always builds his own value system. He may appear polite, even principled, but only within the limits he controls. When there is no audience, he completely disregards morality and mocks the weaknesses of others. This very contrast makes Bill an unpredictable character, simultaneously a gentleman and the embodiment of pure violence. Daniel Day-Lewis portrays this with an overwhelming demeanor. From his voice and gaze to every gesture, everything creates a constant sense of threat. Day-Lewis's monologues made the character even more memorable, as he shifted from calm to explosive brutality in seconds. This transformation made Bill not just a villain, but an almost uncontrollable force. This role also marked a major turning point, leading him to Paul Thomas Anderson's There Will Be Blood, where he further solidified his position with one of the greatest performances in film history, earning numerous awards and solidifying his image as an irreplaceable actor. In There Will Be Blood, Daniel Day-Lewis created one of the most complex and haunting characters in film history, Daniel Plainview, both protagonist and antagonist. The film becomes a confrontation between man and himself, between greed and morality, between religion and power. And at the heart of it all is Plainview, a man consumed by ambition. What makes this character so terrifying is not just the concept, but also Day-Lewis's body language. He doesn't just act with words, but with his entire physical presence. From his limping gait and cold gaze to his constrained gestures, everything contributes to building a man gradually being distorted by his own ambition. In crucial scenes, he even changes his body movements over time. The limp becomes more pronounced, the behavior more distorted, as if the person is being eaten from the inside out. Small details, like the way he chews, breathes, or his facial expressions become part of the story. One of the most memorable scenes is when Plainview confronts Eli. In the script, it's a simple act, but Day-Lewis transforms it into a series of violent and psychologically intense actions, dragging his opponent down into the mud, both literally and figuratively. This absolute immersion transforms the character from mere acting into a living entity within the film, both terrifying and tragic. There Will Be Blood is not just a story about oil or power, but a journey of self-destruction. And Daniel Day-Lewis has made Plainview the perfect embodiment of absolute greed, where his voice, body, and mind merge to tell that story. Daniel Plainview is not just an oil tycoon, but a master liar who built his entire life on manipulation and illusion. On the surface, he always appears as a confident businessman, speaking of family, work, and faith in those who work for him. But upon closer inspection, every word is gradually peeled away like layers of pretense. Even when mentioning his son or his team, the truth behind it was quite different, full of loss, exploitation, and concealment. Plainview wasn't simply a con artist. He was a man who turned words into a tool for making money, using persuasion to make others willingly give everything away. And that's what made him dangerous. Without constant violence, words alone were enough to control a crowd. But as time went on, that successful gentleman facade gradually crumbled. Plainview transformed into a distorted, rough man, almost consumed by greed. His voice became hoarse, his speech disjointed, and his behavior increasingly out of control. The climax comes during the confrontations with Eli, when feigned politeness is completely replaced by rage and revenge. One of the most haunting moments is when he forces Eli to repeat his confession, pushing him to the brink of physical and mental collapse. No longer a businessman or a con artist, Plainview now resembles a creature deformed by ambition, surviving, but having completely lost his humanity. This transformation makes There Will Be Blood more than just a story about oil. It's the tragedy of a man who devours himself until there's nothing left to save. The confrontation between Daniel Plainview and Eli Sunday is not just a religious argument. It's the complete collapse of power, faith, and pride. When Eli was forced to repeat, "I am a false prophet, and God is just superstition," it was no longer mere dialogue, but a form of psychological torture. Daniel not only forced Eli to say it, but also controlled how he said it, turning a confession into a public humiliation ritual. What was terrifying was how Plainview savored this moment. He wasn't in a hurry. He didn't erupt immediately, but prolonged the torment, forcing Eli to repeat the confession until he completely broke down. Each repetition stripped away a layer of self-respect. In the end, Daniel no longer needed to prove anything. His revenge reached its peak not through violence, but through the destruction of his opponent's honor. And when it was all over, the cold words, "I'm finished," rang out as an absolute end, not just for Eli, but for Daniel's own journey of humanity. This character is built on a paradox. The more successful he becomes, the more empty he feels. The more he controls the outside world, the more he loses control of himself. That's why Daniel Plainview is not just a role, but a symbol of alienation. And from that, Daniel Day-Lewis shows something important. The most terrifying villains aren't those who yell and kill relentlessly, but those who absolutely believe in their own distorted sense of righteousness.